Hi, wrestling fans. It's Tony Schiavone. You're listening to Solomonster Sounds Off. And we're desperately out of time.
Solomonster Sounds Off, Jason here, and with me now is a man who was the voice of a generation for wrestling fans who grew up watching Jim Crockett Promotions back in the 80s and later on WCW. He even snuck in a brief stint with WWE. He is back behind the mic as a commentator for Major League Wrestling, and this Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on beIN Sports, he'll be calling live wrestling on cable TV for the first time in 17 years. Tony Schiavone joins me. Tony, how are you, sir?
Hey, Jason, how are you, buddy? I heard you say voice of a generation. Wow. Talking about feeling old. Well, I guess I am old. So there you go. It blows my mind when people say that. But thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, I mean, it's true. You know, people have a certain fondness for, I think, that era of wrestling. And, you know, they think of Jim Ross and maybe they think even of Vince McMahon if you grew up a WWE fan. But you were right there from, you know, the first Starrcade onward. And so you were there for that whole period.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I actually kind of stumbled into working with Jim Crockett Promotions. And then when it was purchased by Turner, they wanted me, and Vince wanted me, and Turner wanted me back. And I just kind of, you know, it got to a point, Jason, where it was a pretty good lifestyle, and I felt there was never a day that went by that I didn't realize how lucky I was, and that's kind of why I did it for so long.
Now, MLW is in Miami back-to-back nights this Thursday and Friday for a double TV taping, with night 2 airing live, or part of it anyway, airing live on beIN Sports. But I have to say, you know, one of the more surreal things in wrestling for me was watching a War Games match this summer on television in 2018 with yourself on commentary, especially, you know, with you having been removed from the business for so long. So how does it feel being back behind the mic calling pro wrestling again?
Well, Jason, at first it was kind of odd, kind of awkward, because wrestling in the 17 years or so that I had removed myself from wrestling really has changed from what I remember. And I say that because a lot more hardcore, a lot more high spots, a lot quicker action, a lot more acrobatic action that I was used to. And I found myself kind of like, well, I better know these moves or I'm going to sound like an idiot. So I tried to study some of the moves. I certainly rely on Rich Bocchini to help me out and Matt Stryker to help me out. But the action is fast-paced, and I found myself now going back and calling action more than I'm talking about storylines, which kind of, if you'll recall back in the end of Nitro and back at the end of those days, I was talking more about the storyline and really ignoring the action a lot. So it was awkward at the beginning, but I think I'm doing okay now. I think I'm settling into it.
Now, I've heard you say you really didn't want the gig originally. I know you left wrestling in the rearview mirror. Court Bauer gave you the chance to host your own podcast, and you slowly came around to the idea of getting involved again. What was it that won you over and made you reconsider? I mean, were there certain boxes that had to be checked off in your mind to make that happen?
No, there weren't any boxes. I got to the point in my life to where, you know, I do baseball with the Braves AAA team during the summer. I do football with the Georgia Bulldogs during the fall. I do basketball with the Georgia Bulldogs during the winter. So basically all my sports seasons are taken up. And it got to a point to where, well, I realized it was extra money. And going out and doing MLW wasn't going to take up that much of my time, one day a month. And that all kind of worked. But really what worked for me, Jason, was the fact that, you know, I go back and I started doing this. Court Bauer, you know, this is before we got on beIN Sports. He started putting things on YouTube and on his MLW website. And I went back and called the action. And I realized from meeting these young guys and young girls that were trying to make their name in the business that they had a respect for what we used to do back in the 90s. And they all knew me and they all respected the business. And I got to thinking that, you know what, if I can in some way with my commentary help them enhance their career, forward their career, then, why not give it a shot and try to help them out? And so I decided, I'm going to do it. And so that's how it started with wrestling. Now, how it started with the podcast was I was approached by Conrad Thompson about doing the podcast, and he kind of set up all that for me, and it has morphed into something really, really great for us. And I'm really happy to be back. When I was approached by a couple of guys, by Conrad and by Court, when I originally said, nah, I don't want to do it. I attempted to rebrand myself, and I just didn't want to do it. But I found out I'm helping people, I think, and I'm having fun.
Now, you were there for a lot of the old studio shows on the Superstation back in the day. MLW Fusion, in watching it, it has a very old school vibe to it in a way, sort of a throwback to those days in its presentation, which I'm sure is what they had in mind when they thought to bring you in to do play-by-play. Do you get that same vibe from the show?
Yes, I do. After I watch it back, I really don't get that vibe when I'm calling it because we do so much in post-production. And then I have to go back and watch it afterwards to really kind of get the good news is that we just kind of call the matches individually without really kind of forwarding the storyline. And then we'll go back and post and do some pickups and do some liners to forward the storyline. So as I'm doing the show, I don't really get a feel of the continuity of what we're doing as much as I do later on. But I do get the feel that it's kind of harkened back to the old days. And one thing I think that Court has done well, and this is another reason I like it, is he's put in place some pretty good production people that have wrestling backgrounds. Like Nelson Swegler, who worked for Vince, was the head of his production for years, and Dan Bynum, who was a director and a producer with WCW for years. Those two guys who I've worked with before really know the business and know production, and I think it's helped make it, it's not on the grand scope of the WWE and of Raw and of SmackDown. It's on a smaller scale, but the production value is very, very good.
Did you keep up at all with the product once you left wrestling?
No, not at all.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, wrestling commentary, I feel today is very different than it was when you were at the desk, either in Crockett or even on Nitro. I think there tends to be a certain genuineness that you and Jim Ross and others had that's sort of missing today in the way that it's delivered. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what you think of commentary today as compared to how it was back then.
Well, first of all, I think Michael Cole and Tom Phillips do a great job. I really do. I like their voices. I like their excitement. I think what has changed so much in wrestling today with announcers is that I think they're really, really overproduced now. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that Vince is in their ear and tells them things to say and how to say it. And I think it's a mistake because I think that if you just say, okay, I'm going to be in your ear and I'm going to tell you to say what I want you to say, then anybody can do it. And I'm not so sure that Tom and Michael Cole at times brings to the table what they can bring to the table. Back then, we were not produced hardly at all, especially back in the Crockett days. They never told me what to say, and they were never in my ear. Sometimes Dusty or Jim Crockett would come out, I'm talking about the studio days, would come out and tell me a few things going forward, but never tell me what to say. They would let me take the love I had for wrestling, and the same thing with Jim Ross when he worked with us, because Jim Ross was like me. We both love pro wrestling. They let me take the love of pro wrestling and announce it that way without telling me what to say, and I pretty much knew the storylines. Today, it just seems overly produced and fed lines. And I guess it works for Vince. I mean, that's what he wants. And he's a multi-billion-dollar corporation now, so you can't fault that. But I just wonder sometimes if the commentary wouldn't be better without him in their ear all the time.
Well, I mean, I just think back also to a lot of those classic segments that you were a part of with people like Dusty and like Ric Flair. And I don't know that you can really have segments like that today because it felt very much off the cuff. And I think that probably is something that's missing today.
Oh, it was off the cuff. They would go, Rick knew the storyline. He knew what he was facing. For instance, let's say he had a storyline with Dusty and they had a match or matches coming up around the country back in the old TBS days, Rick would go out, knew what to say, knew what the angle was, and he would go out and do the interviews. Now, fans often say, I used to love it when you used to interview Ric Flair. Well, I never really interviewed Ric Flair. I just kind of said, here's the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and held the microphone for him. So they would go back, and fans would say, that's, we like that, we love that. But Flair would go out, Dusty would be back in the control room, and Flair would start, and there would be no script, there would be no timeline, just to the point to where Dusty, and this is with Cornette and with Magnum and the Rock and Roll Express and whomever out there, they would go until Dusty in the back thought it was enough, and he would tell the floor director to wrap them up. So that's how they were done back then. Today, there's, for marketing reasons, I know the scripting works well because you want to drive home that point, you want to say it the same way, you want to make sure you promote, TLC or WrestleMania or whatever. But back then it was freestyle, using your own personality and saying whatever you want. Society has changed a great deal since those days. I'm not so sure they could get away with all the things they used to be able to get away with and say, but there was a magic to it back then that I really think is missing.
Now, when you first started, I know you mentioned you were a wrestling fan in your younger days and a sports fan. Did you pattern your announcing style after anybody, or was there anybody who influenced your style?
No, not in wrestling. No, in sports, I always loved Joe Tate, who was a longtime voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And it's odd, a kid from Virginia would saddle up to Joe Tate, but I used to listen to baseball on the radio, 3WE out of Cleveland, because it was a clear channel station. And I used to listen to Nev Chandler and Joe Tate do Cleveland Indians baseball. And then Joe went on to do Cleveland Cavaliers basketball, for which he was a longtime voice of the Cavaliers. I always tried to pattern my voice after him because he was very descriptive and he sounded very exciting. And that's who I tried to follow in sports. As far as wrestling is concerned, no, there wasn't anybody I tried to pattern myself after. I just tried to take what I knew in sports and be a wrestling announcer with it.
Now, you mentioned the minor league baseball. I know, you've done minor league play-by-play for a long time. I know you had to rush out of your own wedding to call a game that night, if I remember correctly. Having done baseball for so long and having done wrestling for so long, even with the break in between, what is the difference in how you prepare for both? Do you find one to be easier than the other?
Yeah, baseball is much easier because we do it every night. And it's not hard to prepare when you've done a game the night before. And it's not hard to prepare when you're doing a game tomorrow night. We have one day off a month. So it's very easy. And listen, I did baseball back in the 80s when I had no stats, when I had no information. And now in the minor leagues, you have more information than you need. And so it's easy to prepare because it's a daily grind. It's a daily thing. Wrestling's a little bit different because I do it once a month, and I kind of got to keep up with what's going on in the 3 to 4 weeks from the time I go from Chicago, like we did last time, and now to Miami coming up this weekend. So it's a lot different. Baseball, I really think baseball is easy, and not everybody, a lot of people say, well, there's nothing easy about you being the only guy and sitting down and talking for 3.5 or 3 hours and calling balls and strikes in a very laid-back game. Yeah, it is easy, I think, because, first of all, I love baseball. I get the game. I understand the game. And I've been watching it for so long. I've done thousands of baseball games, not hundreds, thousands of baseball games. And right now I can sit down and tell stories and talk baseball and watch a baseball game. And, I know all the guys. I travel with them. I know their stats. They're in front of me. I know what happened yesterday. I know what happened a week ago. I know what happened last year. So it's easy to do baseball, I think. Plus, and here's the great thing about baseball, Jason, there's nobody telling me what to say. There's nobody in my ear. It's just me and the mixer and the computer, and I do everything. I play the commercials. I cut up the sound. I do the replays. I do everything. It's a one-man show. and no one tells me what to say. Now, afterwards, if there's something that I said and the general manager doesn't like, he and I will discuss it. But he lets me do my job, and I really think that a lot of times that if you're trying to do your job and someone's screaming at you in the ear, you really can't do your job because you're thinking, oh, am I doing right? Am I doing what he wants? That's what's great about baseball.
Yeah, I didn't even realize until this morning that the Gwinnett team had changed its name from the Braves to the Stripers. Was there a reason? Was there a reason behind that name change? Do you know?
Yeah, there was a reason. They if you look around the minor leagues, most minor league teams have their own identity and their own name, and it helps out with marketing. It helps out with sales of merchandise. For instance, in our league, in the International League, you have the Rochester Red Wings. They're the Twins AAA team. You have the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders because trains are big in Scranton, and they are the Yankees AAA team. The Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, they're the Phillies AAA team. So they each had their own identity, and the people in Gwinnett, and I guess the Braves, thought, let's give the Gwinnett team their own identity because basically they're in the same market. We want to try to separate them from the Braves to a certain extent. And let's go with Stripers because Gwinnett's stadium is up near Lake Lanier, where striper fishing is a big deal, and bass fishing is a big deal. So they originally had thought that we'll go with big mouth, like a big mouth bass, but they decided now big mouth didn't have a good ring to it, and so they went with Stripers, and the logo is a fish. And everything is fish-based, and that's what they try to do. Whether it worked or not, I don't think it really worked as far as getting more people to the ballpark, but I think it worked with marketing, and I think it worked with merchandising a great deal.
I know your run in WWE only lasted a year. You've spoken pretty positively about it in the past. I guess, what are some of your fondest memories of being there, and why was it so brief?
Well, it was so brief because I had 5 young children at that time, and it was very tough to live up there, to make a living. It was very expensive, even though I was making a pretty good living. And my wife wanted to move back to the South. So as great as it was professionally for me, and the kids didn't care. I mean, they were too young back then. It was not good for us as a family, we thought. So that's why I left. It still is, and I'm telling you, with all the years that I've had, the greatest year that I ever had professionally. I learned so much as far as post-production is concerned about, and I was the producer of Coliseum home videos back then, which of course was a forerunner to DVDs and forerunners, obviously the big forerunner to the WWE network. And I did the video cassettes back then, home video cassettes. And I got to learn how to post-produce. I got to learn how to work with an editor. I had a staff. I had an assistant. And I would come up with ideas for video cassettes, doing something different. And they gave me free rein to do it, to make it look different and unique. And it really got my creative juices flowing. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm telling you, had it not been for the little conflict that we had as far as, is it really a good place to raise your family? And listen, I'm not saying anything bad about Connecticut. It is probably a good place to raise your family, but not if you have 5 young kids and you're trying to make ends meet. But had it not been for that, I probably would have stayed up there because I go back and think about all I learned in pro wrestling from the time I started with Crockett's until the time I finished in 2001. My biggest year of growth as a producer and really as an announcer was that year in the WWF. Before the WWF, I was just kind of a baseball announcer that was into wrestling, doing announcing. Then after I left the WWF, I became a producer because that's what I realized by producing that, you know what, announcing makes pretty good money, and I'm going to stay being an announcer because it makes pretty good when you're on, on that one side of the camera. But producing is what I really love, and I really thought I got the hang of it there. I really thought I really grew a lot there, and so it was a great year. It really was.
When WCW folded, some people who worked there commented that they were almost happy to see the ship go down. Ric Flair was one of those people, and that was a company that he helped build, maybe more than anybody else. You were there. Were you sad to see it end, or was it more a feeling of relief?
Oh, it was a big feeling of relief. I was sad because, well, first of all, I knew that, I was making very good money, so I knew that was going to end. But I also had, because I was a Turner employee, I had a very good severance package. It enabled me to go out and look around and do some other things. But I remember the last day. I remember 2000, the last Nitro, when I guess Vince took over and we walked off the set. I remember going to the backstage area, and a lot of the production people, a lot of the girls were crying who had worked hard, and I felt nothing. I felt relief. I got in my car that night and drove right straight back to Atlanta from Panama City Beach, feeling relief, because it was so challenging, and it wasn't a good place to work those last couple of months or even that last year, because we knew it was going to end. We knew it was mishandled. We knew we weren't wanted by Turner Broadcasting. And I felt a sense of relief of just breaking away from them and not having to deal with Turner Broadcasting anymore.
Some of the matches fans can look forward to Friday night in Miami. In the building, I don't believe these are actually airing on the live special, but you've got Low Ki defending his MLW World Championship against Conan in a no disqualification match. And also, Brian Pillman Jr. faces off with Tommy Dreamer in a Singapore cane match. You were very familiar with Brian's father a lot in WCW. You got to call a lot of his matches. I think it's kind of scary how much they look alike and sound alike when you watch him on TV now. He hasn't even been doing this a full year yet. What are your early thoughts on Brian Pillman Jr.?
Well, my thoughts are that he has a lot of growing still ahead of him, but he can do some great things. And not only that, he's got a great attitude. You're right about, it's uncanny how he looks and sounds. I mean, it is absolutely uncanny. And when I told that we're going to have Brian Pillman Jr. do some matches before I even met him, I remember seeing him thinking I could have picked him out in the crowd any day of the week because of how much he looks like his father. I really think he's doing a good job of trying to be his own man. And, it's hard to break away from the shadow of Brian Pillman because of how great a performer he was. But I think I like what he's doing, and I like the fact they got him with the Hart Foundation. And, he's had an injury. I guess he's had a knee injury. And once he's 100%, I don't even think he's 100% yet. I think we're going to see some great things out of him.
Now, another young star on the roster, MJF, I know he was just stripped of his MLW middleweight title. He fractured his elbow a few weeks ago. And so a new champion is going to be crowned in a 4-way ladder match on Friday's live special. Now, he's one of a lot of young names making a name for themselves right now in MLW. Are there any, now we just talked about Pillman, but are there any specific wrestlers that excite you, when you watch them, or names that you think have real breakout potential in 2019?
Well, I think the guy that's become the biggest star for MLW is Filthy Tom Lawler, and I know he's got a no holds barred match coming up against Simon Gotch. That's a pretty good storyline. Rich Swann, I think fans remember him from the WWE. He's got a lot he's got a lot going for him. Got some kids who's going to be vying for that middleweight championship. Cotto Brazil's one of them. Great determination. Jason Cade, who I love Jason Cade. He now has, a little attitude about him, which I don't mind. I really love seeing him. But to me, the guy that is, as we say in the business, over more than any, is Teddy Hart. And I know people remember Teddy Hart from the past. But man, Teddy Hart does some spectacular things. And when Teddy Hart comes to the ring, he's the center of attention. He is absolutely the center of attention. And some kids get it and some kids don't. Teddy Hart's got it. He really does.
Yeah, we've been hearing, I can remember hearing about Teddy Hart even going back probably 12, 13, 14 years. And it was almost like he sort of fell off the face of the earth in a way, and now he's having this career resurgence for himself in MLW.
Yeah, how about that? Just like me. But Teddy Hart is great, and I really love doing these matches. Sami Callihan's another one, and of course, you mentioned Low Ki, which is our world heavyweight champion. Interesting to see him go to face Conan. I haven't seen Conan wrestle in a long, long time. Shane Strickland was our world champion, and he does a lot of great stuff. I love Tommy Dreamer, and we just had Roosh. I guess I don't know if he's aired on our shows yet or not. Maybe he's going to air this weekend. But Roosh is pretty talented kid. Of course, done a great job of bringing in some great talent from Mexico and the luchadors. And back in the day, I wasn't really excited about luchadors, but that's changed. I really appreciate what they do now, and I just thought it was a high spot fest back in the day. But heck, I've grown with the business.
Let me ask you one more thing before we wrap things up here. We unfortunately we've lost a lot of big names in wrestling this year. Larry the Axe Hennig and Dynamite Kid just passed away this week within, I think, a day of each other. Vader was another name that we lost this year, and you had the opportunity to call quite a few of his matches in WCW. I know on your podcast you called the Halloween Havoc match between Vader and Cactus Jack one of the most memorable matches that you've ever called. What are some of your memories of Vader and any interactions with him that stand out?
Leon was a very, very different guy. I always thought that there were two Leons. I always thought there was a Leon that you saw backstage who was kind of away. And I had dinner with him one time in Milwaukee years ago, me and him and a bunch of guys. He was so nice, so polite and everything. And I remember thinking, boy, this is different than the guy that we see in the ring. But he was also the type of guy that when the lights were on, he became a monster. And he really became a scary monster. I mean, it was like when he would drop out of the ring, I was thinking, holy hell, he's going to hurt somebody, and maybe it's going to be me. He got into a different place, and he was really, really a scary guy. I remember it was really one of his better matches, the White Castle of Fear, where against Sting, and we just did the match. It was a Super Brawl match. I think it was Super Brawl 3. I'm not sure. I probably got that wrong. But that White Castle of Fear match against Sting was tremendous because he could bump and he could do crazy things, and that was great. I just saw the match against Ric Flair when Flair won the world title back from him in 1993. That was great. I really think, and I didn't see all the big men, but I think he's the best big man that's ever been. I think by far he's the best big man that's ever been. So I feel fortunate that I got to see him in his prime, so to speak. And I did get to talk to him at WrestleCon right before WrestleMania in Orlando a couple of years back, the one I went there, and you could tell he wasn't doing well, but it was the last time I saw him, and it's sad that he's no longer with us. It really is.
Well, MLW's big Miami Double Shot, it's coming up this Thursday and Friday with a live 1-hour special on beIN Sports Friday night, December 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And Tony Schiavone, for the first time in almost 20 years, is going to be calling the action live. I can't wait to see that myself. Tony, it has been a pleasure having you on. Tell people where they can find you online and anything else that you'd like to promote.
Thanks, Jason. We got... you can find me on Twitter at Tony Schiavone 24. That's Tony Schiavone and the number 24. Also, you can go to our What Happened When WHW Monday Twitter account. We have our podcast, What Happened When, with myself and Conrad Thompson, drops on MLW Radio on Wednesday mornings. However, if you're a member of ours on Patreon, that's Patreon.com/WHW Monday. You can pick it up on Mondays, and we also do videos and special content for anyone who's a Patreon member. every Monday on Patreon at 9 o'clock Eastern. I'm live chatting with fans, video chat with fans, and we talk about everything. And it's a way to interact. And you can get all of our T-shirts at lowestrules.com or boxofgimmicks.com. And I'm part of the Conrad Thompson Empire, me, Bruce Pritchard, and Eric Bischoff. And we're also Bruce, and as you and I are talking right now, Bruce and Conrad are in Europe with their shows live, and we've done a couple of shows live coming up on, actually after I come back from Miami on Sunday the 16th, I'm going to be at Zany's in Nashville with WHW Live. So we're traveling around live and getting good responses, and life's crazy, man. It's crazy how I guess I'm taking advantage of kids who were growing up in the 90s and love nostalgia, because it's been quite a ride, and I thank Conrad and I thank Court Bauer for all their confidence in me. It's been crazy.
It is interesting to hear you with Conrad, to hear Bischoff with Conrad, Bruce with him. It seems like each one of you have your own sort of distinct relationship. It's interesting to see the difference between all three shows.
Yeah, it really is, because ours kind of morphed into Mystery Science Theater 3000, and I did a live show with Eric at Zany's in Nashville last month, and I was like the surprise guest. And after the show, Eric says, "You're really funny. You are really funny. I didn't realize how funny you were." I said, "Yeah, you did. You just weren't paying attention to me because you were too busy running the company." So I always consider myself a very humorous guy, and I'm able to take that being silly, being stupid, as Lois says, that juvenile humor that I have in me, and be able to parlay it into a podcast. So we have fun. It's two guys watching a podcast or watching a wrestling show together, when with Conrad and Bruce and Conrad and Eric, he's going back and he's grilling them like he's a lawyer. So he doesn't grill me, which is good.
MLW Friday nights. You can listen to this man right here, future Hall of Famer Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Good talking to you. I appreciate it.